Faith and Bagora. We're back to Elwood City Limits, the episodic Arthur podcast. After a little bit of a quote-unquote break. I mean, you probably didn't experience, you the listener, didn't really experience any interruptions, but it was a little bit of an extended break for myself, Will Young, and especially for my co-host, the jet-setting Lucas Mancini.
Oh, fiddly-dee. Oh, William, I've come cross from the Emerald Isle, and I'm here to talk about Arthur with you.
I was maybe afraid's not the right word. I was resigning myself to we're gonna have to annoy any Irish listeners we have.
What are you talking about? This is just what I sound like.
It is. There is a little bit of Cape Breton in there. I mean, there is anyway, but I can definitely hear it. But you spent some time around some authentic Irish accents, so it could be a little more cartoony. So I think we're hitting a good stride here. Since you were, of course, over in the Emerald Isle for a good 2 weeks.
Listen, spoilers for the episode, but I'm going to stop doing the accent because it was just getting worse the longer I was doing it. But I will say this: it is nothing if not better than Pepe's Italian accent, which we'll get into later on in the show.
Oh, I was yes, we will. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but boy, what an episode to return to. But yeah, everybody, welcome. This is we're continuing on, of course, with discussing season. Was it 14? Are we on 14 right now? You see, it's been so long since we've actually had to talk about this. Yes, season 14. That I forgot the season. So we're getting back into the swing of things. Really quick, Lucas. I mean, just how was your trip to Ireland?
Oh, it was great. It was quite the adventure. We went all around Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Kilkenny, Galway, back to Dublin. Yeah, lots of fun stuff. I've never been to Europe before, so it was a big adventure, hopping on trains. I will say the one negative aspect was WestJet lost my luggage. So on the way back, luckily enough, better than losing it on the way there. But yeah, we're going to see if that ever comes back or not. If you, dear listener, have an in with WestJet, where is my luggage?
Oh, for goodness sake. You know, it's one of those things that you forget actually happens until it happens to you. Gosh, that sucks. That's a little damper, especially given that all of the updates on your Instagram were very positive and beautiful and at times interesting, culturally interesting.
I'm just telling myself I have my own Brad Pitt a la Fight Club. It was just stuff, Lucas.
Trying to be very zen about it.
Exactly.
Well, while you were over in Ireland, or at least getting ready to go, I wanted to mention the fact that we had a very rare instance of an Elwood City Limits meet-up. Me and our very first patron, Leanne S. It was really nice to be able to see her. She was here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and we just hung around for a few hours, and it was very nice to make her acquaintance and talk about the show. Again, I was like, it was weird because it was like, you know, it was the first time that I've ever been in the situation where, like, somebody is coming to see me, not because we knew each other, but because they're like, I'm a fan of something of yours. And I'm like, oh. And then there was a point in the conversation where I'm like, I feel like I'm talking too much. And she's just like, that's why I'm here. I wanted to talk to you and hear about the show. And I'm just like, okay. You know, celebrity is not something that comes easily to me, and I think it would be more worrisome if it did. And let's take that capital C to little c in celebrity, and let's put at least 5 quotation marks around that on both sides. Either way, it was really nice to see Leanne, and I will just say, and I hope that this doesn't. Well, I mean, in a way, maybe if this sparks a bunch of tourism to the Nova Scotia area, Tourism Nova Scotia can thank me. Yeah, if you manage to find yourself in the Halifax area, I'll at least speak for myself and say, if you're a listener of the podcast and you ask me in a nice and respectful way, and remain nice and respectful, I would be happy to meet up with you if our times and dates allow. So, Leanne, very nice to meet you. Our very first patron from day one. She's been here. And as we get into Arthur, quick mention here. I put this on the social media, the socials this week. It is an Arthur video that is very dear to me because it's in one of my favorite YouTube genres, which is 1 second from every episode of a thing. And this time it's 1 second of every Arthur episode by the YouTuber Zach Zilla. Very good. It was really funny. Like I love those. There's one of my favorites is like 1 second of every Looney Tunes cartoon from like the 1920s to now, and it's just it's 15 minutes of pure chaos. It's the best.
I'll have to look that up. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it should be on all of our social media, or at least it should be on like Twitter and Facebook. So not all of our social media, but the two of the main ones. Check it out there, and Zach Zilla is on YouTube. So we've also had some correspondence in the couple of weeks that we've been away, and let's take it now to elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. Our first email comes addressed to Will, Lucas, and Mike from Cecil. They say, I understand what you and Jason were saying about the show acting like graphic novels were some strange and new concept. This is me and Jason Schwimmer in a few episodes ago. To the show's credit, to Arthur's credit, that episode is how I learned what a graphic novel is. I would have been 8 years old when that episode came out, so I think it's possible that a lot of the kids in the target demographic would have had no idea. Well, how am I supposed to know that Arthur is a show for children? How can you expect me to know that? One interesting thing is that I did the math, depending how the schedule goes. Depending how the schedule goes. You guys will start Season 16, the first Flash animation season, in January or February of 2023, depending on any delays. Oh, depending indeed. You never know. So, I try not to make too many plans for the podcast, to be real with you, because every time I do, something happens that upsets them. So better to have less expectations. So maybe we'll be at the Flash animation season by this time next year. Before we get there, there are some episodes coming in the next few seasons I'm excited to hear your thoughts on. Additionally, I thought it would be fun to create the list of your guys' favorite episode each season so far, which could be a best episode of Arthur according to Elwood City Limits list. So, Lucas, I found this to be very interesting. I'll just go through the quick hits because they start off with yours here. So for Season 1, your best episode was Buster Makes the Grade. Season 2, Arthur's Faraway Friend. Season 3, The Ballad of Buster Baxter. Very Buster heavy.
Of course.
Very Buster heavy.
I mean, that's really interesting to hear, like, all in succession, because I'm not really thinking about that when I'm selecting the episodes. Like, I picked a Buster one that last time, so I should pick a Buster one this time. So I suppose I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve with these and just kind of picking the ones that center on my favorite character at the time. Well, one of my favorite characters, rather.
Buster was an early show heavy hitter for sure.
Yeah.
Season 4, The Blizzard, which you've said is perhaps your favorite Arthur episode ever. Season 5, Kids Are From Earth, Parents Are From Pluto. Season 6, The Boy with His Head in the Clouds. Season 7, Waiting to Go. Season 8, Bleep. Season 9, Law of the Jungle Gym. Season 10, World Girls. Season 11, Dancing Fools. Season 12, The Chronicles of Buster. And Season 13, Fernlets by Fern. You can tell these are good episodes because I remember all of these just by their name. For me, Season 1, my favorite episode was Bully for Binky, which kind of surprises me. I'm always the first to say, like, oh yeah, Arthur's Baby and DW's Baby is my favorite, but that's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being settling on Bully for Binky. Now, if I really think about it. Season 2, Fern's Slumber Party. Season 3, What Scared Sue Ellen. Oh, these are so good. These are all such good episodes. Season 4, My Music Rules. Season 5, Bitsy's Bow. Really? Oh, that's kind of surprised here. Season 6, Arthur and Los Vecinos. Season 7, Elwood City Turns 100. Season 8, Bleep. It's me and Lucas love that Bleep. Season 9, Tipping the Scales. Season 10, World Girls. We both love that episode. Season 11, Big Brother Binky. Season 12, The Chronicles of Buster. And Season 13, The Great McGrady. It was interesting to go back and see what did and didn't make the list, especially earlier episodes, as we now have the hindsight of the episodes that are still regularly brought up. The biggest shock for me was Grandpa Dave's Country Farm not getting number 1 on Lucas's list. It got number 2. So I guess maybe chalk that up to just maybe changing tastes, or simply, in my case, I'd say it's just my lack of memory.
Yeah, that, and I especially nowadays I actually do a lot more work to try and remember the episodes when I'm tabulating those lists, and that's in part because the episodes are a lot more forgettable in the later seasons.
Yeah.
But I'll also say that sometimes an episode stands out a lot more in retrospect, right? It's like movies too. There's some movies where when I watch them, I'm like, okay, whatever, and then I will give the movie more credit if I think about it long afterwards. Remember that movie? I was talking to my girlfriend about this the other day. Remember that movie Malignant?
Yes, I just saw it recently.
When I first watched it, I hated it. And I was like, this movie is terrible. But I will give that movie more credit in retrospect. I still don't think it's a particularly good movie, but I think it was doing something, because there's parts of it that I think about quite a bit and have really stuck in my head. And that's always better than something that's just totally forgettable. And Grandpa Dave's Country Farm, I think, is an episode we bring up so much because it's not until we start to realize that in retrospect, that's kind of the high point of what Arthur can do when it's, really firing on all cylinders with its unique moral, with its character work, with its jokes and humor. That's a great example to kind of be the measuring stick at which other episodes are measured up against. That being said, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a personal favorite, right? Like I think The Blizzard is an episode that I think about so much because it means a lot to me personally, and not because it's in an objective sense the best Arthur episode. Though I think it in an objective sense, it's still a very good one as well.
I think a lot of people would agree with you as well. Read The Blizzard. Yeah, I mean, speaking very quickly on Malignant, I gave that the old 3 stars on Letterboxd, and one of the longer reviews I wrote because I also had a lot to think about. It's, yeah, I mean, that's a truth of anything that you're watching or interacting with, is that how you feel when you first encounter it will not always be the way you feel forever, nor should it be. I think that there are a lot of opinions that I held on to that I formed as a teenager who didn't really know a lot of stuff, and then going back into something being like, oh, either I was wrong or like I was right, but not in the way that I thought I was right, Like in high school, I had the opinion of like, I was like, oh, Twin Peaks isn't that good, or like Evangelion's not that good, and then it's just like those are 2 of my favorite television shows ever, because I needed time to grow, and it needed time to like really steep in my brain, which is really frustrating because you want to be able to know exactly what you're feeling and thinking at any time, but I don't know. It's just human nature. Sometimes you really don't know how you feel about something until you have time to separate yourself from it and go back to it. So one of the most frustrating truths of human existence there. Thank you. Thank you to Cecil for that. Here's one from Megan. Hi, Will and Lucas. I just got through your episode where DW needed tubes put in her ears. When I was a child, I had many surgeries to fix my hearing, and they all included putting tubes in my ears. They worked, by the way. My ears are good now. I'd hope so, or else I don't know how you'd be a fan of our podcast. When I first saw this episode, it brought back memories of me getting ready for surgery, and I can say it's pretty accurate. I was young, so I didn't really think much of it, and it was pretty minor surgery, really, so I was out of commission for a couple of days, and then back to my old self. The tubes eventually fell out, I believe, a few months or so later. I'm happy that Arthur decided to tackle this issue, as I'm sure, like me, lots of kids have had to go through this, and for any anxious children, I hope that it helped them. Still catching up on the podcast and the Patreon exclusive episodes as well. I love your podcast so much. Thank you guys for doing what you do. We've actually run the gamut in terms of feedback about that particular Arthur episode. We have this one that said it was very helpful, and then I remember when we originally covered it, we got an email, and forgive me, I forget who it was from, of a person who really responded negatively to the episode. So always find it interesting when there are differences of opinion. This one is from Amity. They say, for your celebrity casting, I had a ton of fun listening to them. This is celebrity casting for an Arthur animated film, especially the more out there ones like Anya Taylor-Joy or Seth Rogen. And I agree that for an animated Arthur film, they should just get the usual cast. And in Arthur tradition, get some celebrities as side characters, whether it be new characters or the celebrities playing themselves. Speaking of, would you want an animated Arthur film to be either 2D, CGI, less Arthur's Missing Pal and more Spider-Verse style, or even stop motion? Of course, for me, 2D makes the most sense, though I would hope for it to be more hand-drawn than The Flash. Yeah, I would too. Just because, of course, we're purists about that. Lucas, I know that you have very specific thoughts about the Flash animation. Listen, love stop motion. I just feel like it would be a little distracting, and you could do like a cool Spider-Verse style CGI, but that is also very stylized in a way that I don't think that Arthur generally has been. So I would say stick with 2D.
What was that awful CGI movie we watched? Pal's Missing?
Arthur's Missing Pal.
Arthur's Missing Pal. See, that's the problem is, like, I don't know why my mind always goes to, like, the glass half full of, like, they're giving me all these options, 2D, stop motion, 3D, and I'm thinking of the worst possible examples. I'm like, okay, if I pick 2D, it's going to be the Flash animated show. If I pick CGI, it's going to look like Arthur's Missing Pal. But there's no reason for it to have to look that way, right? It could look like that new Peanuts movie that was really pretty.
Yeah, that didn't look too bad.
I would say if you're going to give me stop motion as an option, I'm going to take stop motion. It's not something Arthur's done before, but, you know, if you were to do it like Fantastic Mr. Fox style and give kind of, you know, Arthur is supposed to be kind of covered with fur, right? So if you gave him like a felty texture, I think that would be really cool. Now, that would take way too much money and time for them to ever do it. But since you're proposing it as an option to me, that's absolutely my preference. If that one's not available, I would say 2D animated in the old hand-drawn style, of course.
I've got it. We need to resurrect the technology that Robert Zemeckis had for the Polar Express. We need
yes, mocap Arthur. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
We'll get James Cameron to direct it. James Cameron's Arthur. And it'll be CGI, but it'll be completely mocapped.
And Jim Carrey is going to play at least 5 different roles.
Yeah, Jim Carrey and Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks will be the other roles.
Yeah, exactly. For the response to my reboot proposal, you made a great point about it, though I can't help but let my mind think of what I would do with such an idea anyways. And so far what I've come up with is essentially the movie Boyhood, where we start with Arthur and his friends at 8 in Season 1, age 8, and end with them at 18 in Season 11. A daunting task for sure, LOL. But like you guys said, maybe for the best that Arthur stays as it was. I don't know, Arthur Boyhood doesn't sound too bad to me. Just a sprinkle.
Was there a cartoon where the characters aged like that? Wait a minute.
I mean, probably in some regard. Anyway, I'll move on here. If you think of it, let me know. To just sprinkle in some of the LGBTQ plus agenda in here, sprinkle away. I've also thought about what the characters could come to identify as over time. So far, I have Francine as bisexual (parentheses obvious choice to make), and Fern identifying as ace. That would be asexual and aromantic. When she gets older. I don't know, just something about Fern to me screams her having a lack of romantic attraction for others as a teen or adult. As for my last one, I'll have to go with Molly being a lesbian. Just her whole thing of a punk girl screams, I love women within my own gay heart. And lastly, do you think with Arthur having tackled Ratburn marrying another man, would Arthur have tackled other LGBTQ plus themes, specifically trans identity? As someone who falls under the trans umbrella myself, I certainly would have been intrigued to such an idea. To wrap things up, I've managed to catch up with all the episodes. Certainly a 1-year journey to get here. Wow, holy, thank you very much. I look forward for what you have in store, and let's just hope Adult TW switches careers soon. Well, we can only hope. As for Arthur tackling other LGBTQ themes, yeah, it's possible. It would be. I would like to think it would be a good thing. I would just hope that they do so from an informed and empathetic perspective, because I think I feel we are definitely at the point where showing 2 men or 2 women getting married shouldn't be controversial, even though unfortunately it always will be to a degree. When you come into issues of kids identifying as transgender or anything else along that spectrum, I would hope that they would be able to talk to and involve people in the creative process who have actually lived that experience, because then, you know, we've seen Arthur do a lot of message-based episodes, and some of them come across well, and others of them, unfortunately, are very dated. And this is a very fraught time for trans people. I mean, for LGBTQ people in general, but for trans people especially. And I would just hope that they did a good job. I mean, we're probably not going to get that because, of course, Arthur is canceled or it's not airing anymore. But it is interesting to think about, and I would just really, really cross my fingers and hope that they had something to say without either saying nothing or saying the wrong thing, which is a heck of a needle to thread.
I would also say that, when it comes to tackling the issues of the day, it is something that Arthur doesn't shy away from, but it's also not something that they always do in the way that you would expect. That's something that I've always liked about Arthur, is that it doesn't, when they are giving a moral or a lesson, it's usually not in a sense where you think, this is the social justice issue of the week that Arthur has decided to give their take on. It's always in a way that's a little bit more outside of the box and a little bit more nuanced. That's one of the things I like about the show. LGBTQ issues, any other issues that are facing the children of North America today. I'm sure that Arthur could have an episode about any of them, really. But I think that's something that is unique to Arthur, is that no matter what it tackles, it always kind of does it in an angle that always surprises us, where it doesn't feel like they're taking it on in the way that other kids, because lots of kids shows like to tackle topical issues, but Arthur always kind of finds its own lane with it. And so that's something that I would think is that no matter what issue you could think of, I'm sure if Arthur was going on for infinitum, it would eventually tackle it, but probably not in the way you'd expect.
Yeah, I think that's a good reading. We got a Facebook message here from Stephanie, who just found us, loves the podcast. I'm in my 30s. I used to watch Arthur with my little brother every day after school. He's 4 years younger. The show came out when I was 10 and he was 6, so I was already a bit, quote, too old, but we both loved it. I still watch episodes now and then, and I'm waiting to introduce my niece and nephew. I know this podcast episode is 2 years old or so, but I did want to comment on Prunella Sees the Light. I have mild cerebral palsy, which is a neuro/physical disorder that for me comes with some significant visual issues. Specifically, I have no depth perception and no peripheral vision. I'm also mildly on the spectrum. You'll get more into that when you meet Carl, though as an autistic girl, I'm not very much like him. Marina's experience was and is very much like mine in that I do not want people treating me like a fragile little doll. But also, I noticed that Marina was rightfully offended because Prunella started making everything about her disability. For example, are there braille dice? Can you play backgammon? Yada, yada, yada. And she tries to laugh it off, but then she can't anymore. This happens to disabled people a lot, where, we know you're trying to help, and we appreciate that you're not ignoring the fact that this is part of our identity and experience, but that doesn't mean you have to question everything we do. What I loved even more is that the writers made it very clear the argument was not Marina's fault. So often in my life when I got into Marina's situation, my parents or teachers would say, well, honey, she or they were only trying to be nice. They were only trying to help you. That's casual ableism. And what it says is, you're the one with the disability. You're the one whose body and or brain is different. Therefore, you need to defer to the majority person and apologize to them for misunderstanding their intentions. Of course, I didn't know it then, but that's what it is, and it's a steaming pile of crap. So I'm so glad the writers made it clear Marina was in the right to tell Prunella that it is basically wrong to treat a disabled person as a less-than person. I also liked the resolution in the last scene where they're friends again, and Marina still asks Prunella for help when she needs it. I especially liked when she asked for Prunella's arm when they got to the curb, because I do that all the time. And Prunella has now learned one of the key lessons of having a friend who's disabled. You can help, but please wait to be asked. So glad I found you guys really loving the podcast. And that's the type of feedback we love all your feedback, but this kind of ties into what you were talking about, Lucas, in terms of how Arthur has always approached issues. It's always, I feel like what ties it together is that it almost always uses these types of discussions or issues as a way to engender empathy for the lifestyle or point of view of a person who might be different than yours. So I always love when we get these types of feedback from listeners who watch the show as a kid or are watching it again, listening with us, and give us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about a perspective that we don't have, because neither Lucas nor I, as far as I know, are disabled. Lucas, I know you have dyslexia, but in terms of any physical disabilities, we don't have any. So this is a really valuable thing for us to learn and to expand on from Arthur. So really grateful to Stephanie for that.
Another thing is, that lesson, it's such a great lesson for that episode to have, because at the end of the day, it does validate that Prunella was in the wrong, but it's less about a case of right and wrong and more about that the takeaway is, if you have a friend that you care about, you should be cognizant of their feelings and have open communication with them about what makes them comfortable, what makes them not comfortable. And it's a two-way street, and it's about communication, right? And so, that's a lesson that can be applicable to people who even don't know anyone who's disabled, right? Of course, it's amazing for those who do, because it can help you act accordingly, and not be ableist. But it's also a great applicable lesson for everyone, which is to be compassionate, empathetic, and know when to listen, and be open-minded, especially when it's people you care about. And so I think that's another example of Arthur really paving its own lane when it comes to these issues.
Our last one comes from Yoppie, who, first of all, they meant New Brunswick and not Nova Scotia in the previous email. It's okay, Yoppie. It's all right. I figured that's what you meant. A couple of episodes back, you and Jason Schwimmer, or whomever was on the episode, mentioned that the Arthur show never shows Grandma Thora as a teenager. That is, in fact, not true. We do get a brief glimpse of Grandma Thora as a teenager in the Sugar Bowl. It is a Sue Ellen episode. She has a similar design to Catherine. Yes, you're right, Yoppie. I totally forgot. There is a brief part in an episode where I think they're talking about selling the Sugar Bowl, where Grandma Thora remembers being there as a teenager. Totally left my mind, so you're right. In your last episode, you were naming off actors who could play in an Arthur live-action movie. I chose Betty White to play Mrs. McGrady, unfortunately not doable anymore, and Tim Russ from Star Trek Voyager to play the Brain, who I believe is Tuvok? I haven't seen Voyager, but I know I can recall Tuvok in my head, at least visually. Let me know in your episode your thoughts on my casting, and that's from Yoppie Yogurt. Thank you, everybody who messaged us at elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com or sent us a message on social media. And, of course, we want to give thanks to our lovely patrons at patreon.com/ElwoodCityLimits. Now, we briefly stepped away from For the Kids, a PBS Kids podcast. Our latest offering, well, there was two of them. First, there was the latest entry in the ECL Eats video series, where I made Buster's Tomato Witch. How did it taste? You'll have to join the Patreon to find out. And you'll also have to join the Patreon to hear our latest ECL Presents interview. This one was the brainchild of Lucas, and I think it went very, very well. I recently spoke with our guest and sent him a copy of the interview. He was very happy with it, and that's a YouTuber, the Betamax King.
Yes, please go listen to the Betamax King interview, and if you haven't looked up his YouTube channel and you're curious to know about all these kind of cultural East Coast references, like when we talk about TV from the era that Arthur was originally airing, this is what we're talking about, and it wouldn't be possible without the hard work of the Betamax King. And if you want to hear more about his story, tune into that interview. Pay us our Patreon monies and check it out.
And it is indeed pay what you want. Usually I say like, oh, it's really only $1, which it is. But I will say pay what you want is the scheme that we go with. And we want to thank everybody for who has decided to subscribe to us. We have new subscribers like Ash, Jared G, David Corrales, and Cat Dog. We also have longer patrons who are still here, and we thank them, such as Shayna Keegan. We have Josh Andallo, Rory Forever, and Laura Ashley. We have Infra90, J Wags, Charlie Heckman, Baby Show Addict, Greenhouse Vinyls, and we also have... the second page is loading. Bob Yee, Sydney Long, Ursula Cat, E.J. Accra, and Michaela Gibson, and let's say Kevin Noon. And thank you to everybody. If it's been a while since I've said your name, please let me know. We had look at the time code. We're at almost the 30-minute mark. We had a lot to catch up on, and now it's time to talk about Arthur. And
luckily, this first episode won't take long.
Well, that's what I was thinking, Lucas. I was just like, okay, this is our first ECL since Lucas has come back, and I really hope we get back to business with Around the World in 11 minutes. And It's well, let's get to the cold open first, where Arthur is asking. A lot of these cold opens now are relying on Arthur asking you a prospective question about your life. So, Lucas, you ever think about how the things we use every day come from all over the world? For example, Arthur uses the examples of what Binky is. Binky just happens to has on his person. So, for example, they're playing like catch with a baseball. So the catcher's mitt that Binky has and the baseball are made in China. He has a sandwich in his mouth. The cheese in his sandwich is from Canada. The shirt that he's wearing was made in Malaysia, and the pants were from Honduras. And as he mentions all of these, they disappear. And at one point, Binky is shirtless, and then off screen, I'll grant you, but then Arthur's just like, oh yeah, let me tell you about where the pants are from. I'm like, dude, come on. The man's half naked.
This is a weird cold open for a couple reasons. I mean, that's one of them. For two, it's like Arthur explaining like the globalization of the economy, and it's a weird way to be like, yeah, there's lots of, because this episode's basically just there's lots of different countries in the world, and it's fascinating to learn about all the different countries and their cultures and what makes them unique. But it's a weird way to explain that by being like, yeah, we actually get these really destitute poor countries with all the cheap labor to make all of the stuff that we import into our rich country. I mean, that's not the point Arthur's making, but that is the material circumstances that are why Binky's entire fit is from the third world or whatever. Yeah, so just kind of a weird open. And yes, it's also weird that he makes Binky naked.
You saying that makes me really wish that this Arthur voice actor could do like a cold open of just like, you ever think about the war economy? You ever
You ever think about NAFTA, the NAFTA agreements, and why America doesn't manufacture anything anymore?
War has changed. ID tagged soldiers carry ID tagged guns. Just do the Metal Gear Solid 4 opening. So, it's a baby and the dogs episode.
I thought we were done with this, Will. I thought we had retired. Pal wasn't going to be able to hear Kate anymore and vice versa. I thought this was over, but alas.
Yeah. Lucas, I don't think we're ever going to be free of this. Like, I feel like this is going to have to be something that we're going to have to keep coming back to. Like, I don't think these, I don't know if these go away. Maybe they do. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. So, the babies and the dogs want to know what the word global means because... Okay, so
they've been watching Alex Jones and they want to hear about all these globalists.
So we're at like a backyard barbecue. Dad Reed and Ramon are doing a global cuisine cook-off. So Ramon is adding cumin to lamb kebabs on the grill, and Dad is making something called Singapore salmon. So the word global is in their heads, and Pal says it's probably one of those nonsense words that humans always say, like, be a good dog. So they want to know what global means, and then Nemo pimps up in the tree here, and he says he bets that Pal can't make it around the world before the party ends. And so there's a prize and a consequence. If Pal can do it, he gets Nemo's lamb chop that he just has. Or if he can't make it, Pal has to wear an I Heart Cats t-shirt for the rest of his life, which is seen as like a huge slight. Like basically Pal never be able to show his face among other dogs again. So
where did Nemo get this t-shirt? Where did he get a dog-sized I Love Cats t-shirt?
we can't we can't stop to ask questions. I'm telling you, like the next thing I have in my notes has no less than 4 question marks, and there are more to come after that. So the 4. So when I say the 4, it's Baby Kate, Pal, Amigo, and Mei Lin. 2 babies and 2 dogs. They use a car to travel around the world. Like we find out later that it's all in their imagination, which then, yeah, Lucas, it begs like not only where it's like where did Nemo get the lamb chop from? Like what does he care? Like if it's in everybody's imagination, like how is Nemo judging this? Couldn't he just say that Pal failed anyway? Or is it a collective
Nemo's trying
imagination?
to kill them. Nemo, in their imagination, Nemo tries to kill them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in their imagination, they start using a car to travel around the world. My first note after this was, bro, what? They first travel to Italy before Nemo tries to kill them. They travel to Italy, and I'm not kidding. I was eating breakfast while I was watching this, and then who shows up but everybody's favorite Italian, Pepe the flea. I nearly spat out my breakfast. I was hooting and hollering because what an episode for Lucas to return to vacation from. He gets to experience the richness of Irish culture, and then he gets to come back and just have his culture slapped in the face again.
That's right. We have a Pepe. He serves them pasta.
Yeah.
For the listeners who maybe have gotten on later and they haven't listened to the episode where we were first introduced to Pepe, why don't we give them a little taste of the Pepe voice if you'd like, Will. I'll allow you to do the Pepe voice.
Just, it's something along the lines of just like, it's a little bit less high pitched and squeaky, like because he's like, "Hi, pal, welcome to Italy. We serve the pasta, have it the ravioli." Like you can do it at home. It's just, it's so.
It's got this sense of like Adam Sandler doing an Italian accent, which is to say, not an Italian accent at all.
Yeah, it's really annoying. But I thought it was very funny because, again, as I said, it was just like, wow, great. Hey, Lucas, come record this episode with this black spot on your culture.
Probably my most hated Arthur character of all time.
Even more so than what's her cousin Cora?
Oh, what was Cousin Cora's deal? See, I can't hate her that much because I don't remember her, I guess.
You know what? Cousin Cora has only showed up once so far, so Pepe has been here like 3 times, and he's had like a whole episode devoted to him, so you know what? Fair enough. We've managed to rehab some hated characters on this show, but I don't know if there's any rehabbing Pepe. He's not my least favorite, but he's certainly down there. I would have to think about who my least favorite character is right now, but nothing's really coming to mind. This is weird. I've been uploading all of the old episodes onto YouTube and kind of hearing bits and pieces from it. And I remember like early on in the show, and even me and Peebs were talking about this a couple episodes ago, how cute Pal is. But then he opens his friggin' mouth, and I just...
Oh, interesting.
Fascinating. If Pal's not talking, he's one of my favorite characters. When he starts talking, he's one of my least favorite, maybe my least favorite.
British Pal. This is quite the development from you, because you were like #1 Pal fan, but it makes sense. He is kind of a different character when he's going, "Oh, Kate, I'm a British dandy now."
I know, it just ruins so much of what I like about Pal, and it's just like he's like mini Mr. Ratburn. I'm like, that's not what Pal is. He's not even that old.
We got to get through this around the world in 11 minutes because the episode really doesn't need this much discussion. So they're
in Italy. I just want to say, not to cut you off, but what happens throughout the episode is that their various vehicles get sabotaged by Nemo. Did you find there's a scene here where they're all on Vespas, and then Nemo gets in this like rocket car? I got some big Speed Racer vibes from this.
Speed Racer, kind of like James Bond, he's using gadgets in the back of this weird rocket car, and again, he's trying to kill them in this part, and he also runs off the road, and then later on, when they're in the air, they eventually get on an airplane, and he's even more overtly trying to kill them, like Twilight Zone style, like ripping apart the wings of the airplane.
There's a cat on the wing.
Violent. Yeah, exactly.
So they use a boat. That gets sabotaged by weather. They wash up on the shores of Egypt. They take a balloon past various landmarks into China, which they stop at for Mei Lin. And
Mei Lin's got a silly line here. This could have been punched up a little bit. She goes, "That's the Great Wall of China. We must be in China."
Didn't even notice at this point. I was just kind of like looking at my watch. So the Nemo sabotages the hot air balloon that they used to ride in, so they take a plane. Speaking of punching up, there was a part where Kate was like, "Can you fly, pal?" To which I was like, "It's not real! He can do anything!" And like he said, they're trying to fly home to Elwood City. Nemo is sabotaging the plane, which they're like real life analogs to this. Like all the different vehicles they're getting are like toys that they're interacting with in the real world, which is this is all in their collective imagination ? There is a part where they parachute out. Pal has to jump off the plane as he's like fighting with Nemo over the airplane toy. Pal jumps into Kate's arms, who is in a parachute. Nemo just drops, and I wrote here, LOL, Nemo dies.
Yeah, well, it's one of his 9 lives, right?
Yeah. There was a funny reading here at the end. So they go around the world. Nemo doesn't hold up his end of the bargain, though, because he says, and he's got that very, like, slimy way of talking. He's like, I suppose you want to claim your lamb chop for winning the bet. Well, you can't. I ate it.
Yes, this was all for naught.
Yeah,
like,
just the weird way he said, I ate it.
Yeah. This consequence-free episode, what consequence it had left is also removed from the episode. So it's just kind of like...
But it wasn't all for nothing. They had fun.
Oh, true. The real lamb chop was the friends we made along the way. I see.
Yeah. So that's it. That's all I want to say. Very quickly, before we get into, I think, the thing we both want to talk about. And now a word from us kids. Just quickly going over this again. It's one of the more cutesier ones. We've had some word from us kids that are like can be kind of legitimately interesting. This one is just like the kids in Miss Corpus's class learning about continents and the different countries that their families come from. The only note I had for this was, "What's up, Miss Corpus? What how you doing?"
I wrote down, and I mean this a little bit in jest, but also not, I didn't realize Americans learn this stuff. Just from, like, viral videos of, like, Americans not knowing where countries are, right? Like, I just assumed that they never learned about the countries in Europe. These kids are being like, I'm from Denmark. My family is descended from Denmark. I don't know. I feel like I've seen so many people on the street, like, name, you know, what continent is this country in? And they say, like, a city or something, you know?
Yeah.
But I suppose the best laid plans, you can learn this stuff in elementary school and you could just as easily forget it. But yeah, I learned something about the American education system with this word from us kids.
Well, it could just be that Miss Corpus is just a really good teacher who went against the grain to teach them a little something about geography. All right. We got that one out of the way. Now we'll talk a proper Arthur episode right after this.
Hey, it's Jason Schwimmer, and I'm from the Finding DW podcast. You can support this podcast by following on Facebook. They're at Elwood City Limits, Twitter at ECL Podcast, Tumblr, Elwood City Limits, IG, as the kids say, Elwood City Limits. If you want to send them an email, drop them a line at elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. This podcast, the one you're listening to now, is available on iTunes, on Spotify, youtube.com/Elwood City Limits, and on your favorite podcast platforms. And if you want that extra sweet content, check out the Patreon at patreon.com/Elwood City Limits. How'd I do?
And now, back to Arthur.
It's called Muffy and the Big Bad Blog. Again, we start this one off with, like, Arthur asking a, like, prospective question about maybe something that's happened in your life. So the question that Arthur's asking as he's playing tennis with Francine and Muffy's on the sidelines: have you ever been with someone who has to write down everything that happens? So on the one hand, I feel like no one has had this problem. No single person. On the other hand, I have been this person. I have been the type of person who's just like, oh yeah, like, remember when we were both in the same radio program. So, like, they were like, go buy a field recorder. And then I would bring the field recorder around to, like, my friends and be like, I'm just going to put it on the table and record what we say because we're so funny. And they're like 2 hours of us playing video games and doing nothing. So I am very guilty of this, but it's also just like, I don't think people have this problem. It's not very relatable.
Some people tweet too damn much.
Well,
that's a very real thing.
Well, and so this is going to be something that I don't want to get into right this second, but this episode like made me think about a lot. So let's just save that for like 10 minutes from now. The idea of this episode, so the whole thing is like Muffy is writing down everything that Arthur is saying in the cold open. The episode itself starts with Muffy announcing that she's going to Costa Rica, and she advertises her new blog to the class. It's called The Muffington Post. Polite clap for that
name.
One.
Snappy name.
Polite clap for that one. So this is where it's just like, oh, this is going to be about blogs, as Muffy goes on the trip with her dad, and everywhere she goes and every activity she does, she is blogging on her laptop. So again, this is on the one hand, I think this episode's coming out in like late 2010. It's totally appropriate for Arthur around this time to be educating kids about blogs. Like one of the emails that we read said, it's just like kids probably don't have an idea or have a loose idea of what a blog really is. So this is actually pretty appropriate, especially for the time. It's also the funniest thing in the world in 2022 to be like talking about blogs as if they're like the biggest thing that will be like they're like books 2.0. They're going to be the next big thing, and then looking ahead 10 plus years later and being like, it really wasn't that big. Like to have a whole Arthur episode devoted to it is just like, it's cool and all. You could have also not.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does feel incredibly dated. Like, I feel like people don't talk about blogs anymore. There's a line where, so one of the B plot of this episode, the A plot is Muffy has her blog that she starts by blogging in Costa Rica. The B plot of this episode is that Mr. Ratburn is a Luddite.
Yes.
And doesn't own a computer, and he's learning internet literacy, basically, which this is a little bit of a retcon because Brain did explain to him how to use the computer in a previous episode.
But I will say that version of it was like Netscape Navigator dial into the internet. Now it's completely changed again, so I wouldn't be surprised if Ratburn was like completely turned around by that. But you're right, this is like he
knew how to send emails though, and now he doesn't know how to turn the damn thing on. So Brain is Mr. Rapper doesn't know what a blog is, and Brain gives the really unhelpful tidbit of information. He goes, "Blog is short for web blog." It's like, great. That's so that now I understand it so much more now. But you're right that like it's all very passé the way that they're talking about blogs and hearing the term even blog so much in this episode. But, and we'll get into this a little bit later on, some of the lessons are still very applicable. In fact, are even more applicable than when this episode was originally airing. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But all the blog stuff is very funny for how dated it is.
So did you ever keep a blog? Like, did you ever, like, before social or around social media, did you ever, like, do a straight up, like, written, like, typewritten blog?
I don't know. Do you know what Pixo is? I had a Pixo website back in like grade 6.
Wasn't that primarily for photos?
It was like a web. It was like a tool you could use to make basically like a website.
Okay.
But like really remedial. Like it wasn't. It like even a step below. Something like Squarespace or one of the more kind of professional ones. This was like something intended for kids, and I think this was like pre-Facebook. I had this in like grade 6. In fact, we actually had a assembly at my elementary school about Pixo because kids were getting up to some. The kids were being mean to each other on each other's Pixo websites.
Okay, if they're being mean to each other, that's not good. But you said like kids getting up to, and I'm just like, oh no, like on the internet.
They were just being naughty on their Pixo websites. But so that's like the closest thing. And then I had a Tumblr back in the day, but I wasn't actually like writing anything about myself. I was just blogging pictures I liked.
Yeah.
What about you, Will? Did you ever have a blog?
Oh, sure. It's funny you say Pixo because for me, we have enough of an age gap where for me, when you wanted to create a site. In elementary school, you use like GeoCities or Angel Fire, or Lycos or whatever. So yeah, totally. I had a bunch of blogs.
You'd have a little man, like a GIF of a little man shoveling and
under
it's like
construction.
Under construction, yeah.
Oh yeah, constantly. Yes, definitely. I've had blogs in the past. Because I was a white teenager, and I thought that I was thinking I thought the thoughts that I had nobody else was thinking in the entire world. So never very popular, and always very, very like, probably would look back on that and cringe. I think I found an old blog of mine like earlier this year or late last year and kind of went through it, and it's like I was surprised at how much I didn't hate it. Like, there is very much still some cringy stuff in there, but it was also like, oh, okay, like, I'm actually not that bad of a writer, and I had skills even as when I was younger, but it just needed to be like refined through actual experience. So yeah, I had my fun with blogs. I was never very good at making them look good, but I could think of content for blogs, certainly. We also see here, I will mention, in Muffy's Costa Rica journey, we get a shot of El Boomerang from Follow the Bouncing Ball. So that is still going, and so it seems that we'll continue to follow that thread.
How did El Boomerang get to Costa Rica? We'll never know, but I do like this little Easter egg, this kind of like Where's Waldo-esque, can you spot El Boomerang? And I hope it continues.
I will just briefly mention here, and Lucas, you touched on this already, that the B plot is Mr. Ratburn trying to get the internet. We see him going to like a Circuit City or a Radio Shack.
Yes.
What did you think of it?
Throwaway character of the week. Throwaway character of the week.
I was going to say, I figured this member of the Geek Squad, Trip, would be your guy.
Yes, evil, on-commission Best Buy bunny Trip upsells Mr. Ratburn and tells him he has to buy the most expensive computer because it's good for beginners. I feel like off-screen he's telling him to buy the gold-plated HDMI cables because it's going to make it go faster.
Probably sold him an Alienware desktop.
Exactly. So yes, Trip and his unscrupulous sales tactics is the throwaway character of the week.
We also, there's a couple of cutaways to Mr. Ratburn trying to turn on his computer, and eventually he gets suckered into falling for email scams, which is like,
yes,
it's very like an easy setup, but like, go for it. Like, Ratburn is totally the character to do it with, and I wouldn't say it made me like heartily laugh or anything, but it's like, yeah, that's what would happen. So I appreciated it. But the A plot, the meat of this episode is that Muffy's really, really into blogging. So we see her blogging from a desktop, from a laptop, and then eventually she gets her own smartphone. My Smartphony, it's called. And then she is constantly online. She cannot log off. So I had a note here as we were alluding to, we would talk about. So it's funny to think about how, when this episode came out, Twitter already existed. Like, Twitter started in the late 2000s, but the main method of online expression for this brief little window from the late 2000s into the early 2010s was blogging, because Twitter just wasn't as popular and Facebook was still gaining steam. However, I don't think it was ever a potential danger to kids the way that social media is now. And the way the episode talks about it is that Muffy, like, essentially, if you took like blogging and replaced it with being on Twitter, it would make a lot more sense in terms of how addicted Muffy is to being online. And I also find it interesting, the story seems to be that Muffy is just online all the time, and it's taking her away from real life, which is a very like parental concern. My parents didn't want me to play video games too much or be on the computer too much or watch too much TV because it would get you away from playing outside and being with other people. Fair enough. And I feel like if this were made 5 years later, it would be about how Muffy's constantly online and she's seeing stuff that will like mess her up for the rest of her life. Like 2010, we're all dumb kids. We're going to Rotten.com. We're going to E-Bombs World. We're playing all of the X-rated games on Newgrounds. Like, that's even passé by then. You can see, like, the fact that Muffy has unchecked internet usage and the conversation is like, oh, like, it's taking her away from her friends or her real life or experiencing life, and not like, hey, there's some bad stuff on there. Kind of gives you an idea of what the conversation was like then.
Well, and I will say, though, that I think that in an adult context, this is even more applicable to the here and now. Like you said, if you replace blog with Twitter, I know people who give a inflated importance to the dramas and the inner workings of stuff that's happening on Twitter, and they treat Twitter like it's a reality, sometimes to the detriment of people they know in real life. So that's a very real phenomenon. And something that happens in this episode is the kids start to get less interested in Muffy's content as she's
Right.
back from Costa Rica, and eventually she's just talking about her day-to-day, you know, what curtains she's going to get, and people stop reading the blog because they don't find it interesting. So what does Muffy do?
Which I feel is the wall that every young content creator hits at some point, especially the ones that are like making it about their life and just like eventually you're going to run down to stuff to talk about unless you do other stuff.
Well, and here's the thing. It follows the very real arc
Yes.
of low-level content creators.
Right.
Because what does Muffy do to stir up clout? Drama report.
Drama
it's
blog.
Like, yeah, exactly. It's like Keemstar. You know, like the that's literally in vlogging. That's what happens on YouTube. That's what happens on Twitch. In that world where you're a content creator and the content is you, it seems that if you just don't got it, the trajectory is to start drama with something else, and that's what gets eyeballs. So this, I thought, was... I wonder if this is art imitating life or vice versa. Like, was this already kind of a phenomena? Were the mommy blogs already feuding in 2010? Or was Arthur kind of prescient in this sense, where this is very much the trajectory for content creation, is that when in doubt, start some drama.
I think it's a very yeah, you're good, you're right to say prescient. Yeah, so Muffy does start a drama blog for clicks. And she begins kind of talking smack about Francine. I also thought that maybe this was maybe lightly touching on things like TMZ perhaps at the time, because TMZ started off as like a blog, which was probably one of the more notable blogs that became essentially like a minor media empire. So I imagine that might be a way for them to touch on it that way. Francine is, of course, offended by this and takes the Frensky Star online, much like our friend, the Frensky Star, has an online version of the phenomenon to respond to Muffy, and this sparks a feud, which gets interest renewed in the Muffington Post. Also, very funny to see that a lot of the blog correspondence is done from desktop computers. Like, Muffy has a smartphone, and she's the rich girl, so she's the only person with a smartphone. But Francine has to use a desktop computer at school, at the library, and at home to continue to update the blog. Whereas, like, if this were happening again 5 years later, you would just see their thumbs on the phone. So yeah, like, it is really interesting to see them comment on this. It's just a little bit of I wouldn't say a miscalculation, but just like they're almost there, but it's about blogs, and it's like, it kind of doesn't work in that way, but it would if you just substituted that. It ends up that Binky creates a third blog called Mr. Chatterblog to call out Muffy and Francine.
They do it in a way where it's a really good reveal, where everybody's talking about, like, did you hear there's a whole website dedicated to Muffy and Francine's drama? And they're all, like, looking at Mr. Chatterblog, and they're like, who wrote this? And there's this great reveal where Binky comes out, and it was Binky all along. And, they're like, Binky, why did you do this? And there's some great lines from Binky where he's like, I call him as I see him, and I already have 112 hits.
Yeah, 112 hits. Like some of the counters of like talking about like, oh, I got this many. I'm just like, oh, that's so cute. I was watching a video about like a music video that went quote unquote viral in like 1999 or 2000, and it was like they saw huge success. They had like 250 visitors in 3 days or something like that.
It's like in the Batman movie when they're like, my God, the Riddler has 500 fans.
Right. He had 500 people on his live stream. Oh my God, he can't be stopped. We're
almost, next Twitch stream, we're almost at Riddler levels.
This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. So I also had a note here. I try to keep it light on terms of the like criticism of the animation. I just couldn't help but notice that in the second half of this particular episode, the characters started looking a little bit rougher than usual, and I've just been noticing that the animation quality generally is not up to where it has been in the past. It's especially like like every once in a while and again, hate to sound like the old person that I am, because one of the older people who listen to this podcast is me, one of. You go back to Arthur season 1 and the fact that, well, that is like one of the more expensive seasons of the show, and they had a lot more time to work on it, so a lot of the animation looks a lot smoother and more consistent. So it's a little bit unfair to compare the two, but it's also, the comparison is there. Anyway, the episode ends up with Muffy and Francine deciding to merge their blogs together and only talk bad about each other in private.
Yes, the exact quote is, "From now on, if I insult you, it's going to be in private."
And they even have a column together called She Said, She Said, which is actually a really good title, where they have two differing points of advice. It reminds me of those Arthur YouTube videos that I've put in the Discord before of like the game where it's like Binky is giving advice and then slowly becomes this like horrible god creature. Just reminded me of that a little bit, the two different opinions. And Mr. Ratburn comes into the sugar bowl where everybody is because he wants to show them his new boysenberry. Do you get it? And he's using it. He's using it to post on his blog, which is called The Rat's Nest. Which, to be fair, I think they really captured Ratburn's spirit in The Rat's Nest. He's like, oh, I put up word problems and I correct people's grammar. And like, it's just like, it's very him. So I thought that was a funny way to end that. It seems that maybe we might be getting away from the whole thing of Ratburn is technologically illiterate. Maybe he'll actually become better than we think.
True, we never see follow-up of him ostensibly giving his credit card, his SIN number to some African prince or something. Like, we don't really see the payoff for him falling for the phishing scheme.
So, all right. Around the World in 11 minutes, is there much to say at all?
No, it's just kind of not a good episode, I would say.
No.
I would say this is an episode where Arthur feels like a kid's show, and I mean, it is a kid's show, but it feels like a kid's show where there's not really thought being put into what you're seeing.
Yeah.
It's just stimuli. It's like the babies and the dog are going to different places.
Kids show derogatory.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
And it also marks the return of Pepe, which is just, 2 thumbs down.
Unforgivable.
Yeah.
Unforgivable. So, yeah, not a good episode. Okay, so let's talk about the actual, the actual meat of this, and I'll let you go first again, Lucas. Muffy and the Big Bad Blog. What did you think of this, all told?
Well, yeah, I was really surprised by Muffy and the Big Bad Blog because we've had episodes before that kind of get dangerously close to the sentiment, the kids beyond their damn phone, you know what I mean? The kind of thing you see where when people make cringy posts like, oh, I went to a playground and I put up these stickers that say not available on the App Store. And I always find those kind of sentiments really corny and kind of out of touch because often when kids are on the phone, they're talking to their friends. Lo and behold, the actual moral of this episode is way more, to steal a word we were using earlier when talking about Arthur, it's more nuanced than that. And it actually, despite all the antiquated language around blogs, is really applicable to today, which is that Muffy is losing touch with the real world because she's so caught up in posting everything, which is true. This is something that people could do where they're so focused on posting what's happening to them on Instagram or on Twitter that they kind of forget to live in the moment to an extent. And then to another level, she gets caught up in this online feud with Francine, which reflects poorly on them both. And the conclusion they both come to is that, listen, we're going to have our disagreements, but we can kind of regain our dignity or keep our dignity if we have those disagreements in private as opposed to in front of the world at large. And this is advice that I think it's not just for kids, but like many people I know in my life. Right. Sometimes I'll see people post things and I go, you know what? Sometimes you're better off not posting. Sometimes I read people's social media and I think, I shouldn't know this about this person. There should be other ways that this person deals with this as opposed to putting it out there for everybody, because you never know who could be reading that stuff. And also, it's when you're talking to someone, there's a lot of things you're able to infer based off their body language, their tone, And also, it doesn't live there for forever, right? They say something and it goes away. And so there's much more room for mistakes or nuance or learning or growing. But when you put something on social media, it's like you are putting up a billboard for the world to see. And if it reflects poorly on you, that's really bad because it's up there and someone could have screenshotted it, and even though you deleted it or anything like that. So, I think the takeaways from this episode are really good and really applicable to not just kids, but adults today. And I think despite it is definitely dated with all the blog language and the names of everybody's blogs and the layout of everybody's blogs, and it just kind of seems unrealistic that everybody's so into Buffy's blog.
Yeah.
Like, that just doesn't seem to be reflective of reality whatsoever. Maybe it was in 2010, but certainly not anymore. So that stuff's really dated, but I came away from the episode thinking that it was a really good episode for the moment, surprisingly enough, and I was impressed. What about you, Will?
I liked it too. And I will admit that the concession you have to make is that a lot of this, as you mentioned, the language around blogging and whatnot is antiquated, and probably if a kid watched this today wouldn't make a lot of sense. It's funny, like while you were talking about it, I'm just like, this is actually one that could do with a slight remake. Now, we've seen Arthur episodes get remade before, and it's just basically, you know, they just excise one part of the plot and it's basically untouched. But I think this one is like, you could tweak this a little bit to be about social media and it would be just as relevant today as it tried to be in 2010. And that's why I think it really succeeds, in that it was truly ahead of its time. It just didn't have the platform correct. A lot of the language around what they're using is actually pretty, like, still relevant, and it is something that kids need to learn about. It is, you don't realize either. And I don't mean to hawk your talking points here, Lucas, but it's funny that you talked about how, like, you never know who's going to see what online. I recently had an experience where, like, somebody contacted me on my Twitter account, which is not a professional account. It's just me. And they were just like, oh yeah, we've seen your work in such and such, and we were wondering if you were open to an opportunity. And I was like, like, all I post about on my Twitter is like Kamen Rider and wrestling, and it's just like, So, but it's also public, so that's totally true, and it doesn't feel true until something like that happens to you. It's a really good lesson to learn, and I'm always glad to see television shows that are on the cusp of technological literacy when it comes to teaching kids. And I know that Arthur is very much an old school show, which, like, when we started, we were talking about like books and the internet was just a gleam in people's eye. But Arthur has managed to has managed to evolve fairly well in terms of talking to kids about the latest venues in which they can access information, because that's what kids usually start using the internet for, and to see cool videos usually. I only wish, like, again, remake this and be like, hey, there's some stuff out there on the internet that can really mess you up, which I think all of us have a story about seeing something on the internet we weren't supposed to. So, yeah, I thought the message and the intention behind it was really good. It was just a little bit off in its aim, but it couldn't know that at the time. And, of course, great character to use it with Muffy. And I did like the little back and forth between the Muffin Post and the Frensky Star. I thought that, yeah, I liked this episode too, and really appreciate what it's trying to go for. Well, much like riding a bike, ECL back at it once again as we head into the summer of 2022. In a couple of months, we'll be celebrating 6 years, but hopefully by then, knock on wood, hopefully, we'll be at the end or close to the end of season 14, and we continue along that road. So coming up next week, of course, for our patrons, we are going to be getting back to For the Kids, a PBS Kids podcast, with my pick this time. We're going to be talking about the Berenstain Bears, a childhood favorite of mine. The books are, and I have watched the show before. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history, including, is it Berenstein or Berenstain? Yes, we're going to get
to the bottom of this.
Yeah, we're going to have to touch on that. So that'll be coming up next week, and you'll hear a preview of it on the free feed. In 2 weeks' time, we'll be back with ECL. We're going to be talking about Arthur Unravels and All the Rage. And I think that Arthur Unravels might have another Arthur viral moment in it that I'm interested for us to cover. But Lucas, I'm very glad that you had a good time on your vacation, and glad that you're back and we can get back into the schedule of things. Hopefully the maritime summer will be able to at least try to compete with your times over in Ireland.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, it's surprising to say, being from here, but the weather here is better than the weather in Ireland.
No kidding.
You know that old adage about you don't like that East Coast weather, wait 5 minutes?
Yeah.
It is like that to an even further degree in Ireland. You'll get all 3 seasons in one day. It'll be sunny, and then it'll rain, and then it'll be cloudy. And it's a little bit colder right now in Ireland than it is here. So it's actually kind of refreshing to be back in the maritime weather. Not to say anything bad about Ireland. It was still a lovely adventure. Just bring me my luggage, WestJet. Come on. That's the ECL demand. Do it, WestJet.
Do it, WestJet. All right.
Listen, if you work at WestJet, you could have free Patreon for life if you could get me my damn luggage.
Guaranteed.
Please.
Guaranteed. I co-sign that. Get the man his luggage. My name's Will Young. Thank you for listening to this episode of Elwood City Limits. And for Lucas Mancini.
Did you need to learn Costa Rican?
We'll see you next time. Sorry, Lucas. Just 1 second. My Siri's going off.
Hey Siri, why are we watching another episode with the baby and the dog? I hope he leaves that in.